people to join before we get cracking.
Looks like a pretty good lineup to me.
Great. I just saw you a few hours ago, mate. I forgot you were joining tonight.
Train delays, oofed. That is rough. But you're here in time for whiskey, so all is well.
Michael Seagrave showing off with his whiskey cabinet behind him there.
Pretty impressive.
Unless it's a fake background.
I think that's
Oh,
probably
where'd
what
he
I
go?
love seeing most sometimes, is like seeing everyone's whiskey collection behind and like getting cabinet envy. You get to a certain point in whiskey where you're like, I'm really jealous of someone's cabinets and, you know, how they've ordered it and everything. So
And David Legos one puts everyone else to shame.
I've got to take Richard to David's house so that he can see it and I can be like, right, so this is what I want, build it for me. And then that's when he files the divorce papers. Alrighty, well, let's not dilly-dally too long. Welcome everyone, thank you so much for joining this very exciting tasting with two of my favorite people who conveniently are located nearby to me.
Could have done it at the same place.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, so obviously we're trying quite a few cask strength whiskies, one work in progress, which I'm really excited to try as well. So please don't drive, you know, the general, try not to drive while having 5 whiskeys. I recommend if you have enough glasses for each of the whiskey, pour them out so that you can kind of come back to them, leave a little bit in your glasses so you can compare. But really, without further ado, I think we should probably get cracking on to, well, you call it a classic for a reason. And I want to, obviously, for those who don't know, introduce Andrew and David Baker, who are the brains, the brawn, and all the things behind Bakery Hill Distillery.
Yeah, lovely to meet everyone tonight.
G'day everybody. This should be fun. Don't forget to put your comments and questions in the chat, and Emma will read them out, and a bit of interaction will be great.
Yeah.
So did you want us?
Are we starting off with the classic?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the classic, Dad?
Everyone get a classic in their glass.
We better figure out why the hell I called it a classic. Just a little background story for people. When I started making whiskey, would you believe that was 22 years ago? I'd never drunk a drop in my life. Basically, I got all this information coming out of Scotland saying the only place that could make whiskey is Scotland because of the air and the water. If you ain't got it, you can't do it. I was a chemistry teacher, so no Breaking Bad comments, okay? I've heard them all, and we won't tell you where we make meth anyway. But basically, I taught year 11, year 12 chemistry, so I was well based in chemistry. And I sat down and thought to myself, well, this is the raw material, malted barley. This is the end product. How do I do that? And I had to have a very steep learning curve. And the learning curve pointed me to the lovely whiskies that came out of some of the areas of Scotland. And the ones that I particularly like were the sweet, honey, nutty, caramel ones. And that's what we've done with our whiskies. They've got a sweet residual sugar going through it. Now, the first one is a classic. Now, I called it a classic because it was standard, it was unpeated, it was double distilled, it was matured in American oak bourbon casks. It was exactly the way that most whiskies were at the time. So I thought, well, let's just call it our classic. This is the standard. And we can move off with our other whiskies depending on the flavour and the aroma that we've developed. So that's where the word classic came from.
I'll just add a little bit here as well. So the classic is a great place to start with our whiskies, because really this flavour profile is the DNA that really runs through all of the Bakery Hill sort of core range. So as we try everything throughout the night, it's sort of building and shaping a little bit from this original whiskey. If, as many of you guys, if you've had our whiskies before, we really, our house style is, as Dad mentioned, American oak ex bourbon barrels. We don't do much in the way of sort of ex wine barrel, sherry barrels, those sort of things. Dad really wanted to make that sort of classic, there's that word again, single malt whiskey.
I wanted you to enjoy the whiskies that we make, not that have sherry, port or Madeira over the top, clouding the flavour of the whiskey. So what you've got in your glasses is what we've produced 100%. And what I was thinking of before, the area in Scotland that I absolutely fell in love with is Speyside, because of the sweet character of their whiskies. So that's what we've tried to do with the sweetness and the aroma. And the other thing before we kick off, just leave a little bit in your glass, because what we find with our whiskies is that they get sweeter and sweeter and sweeter. The classic that we're about to start with will end up like a violet crumble. It would be that sweet after about 10, 15 minutes. Well, do you want to take, or who's taking?
Well, I think we've all been drinking it, Dad. I think we're all halfway through it. So you better.
You're late to the party. We're all halfway through the dram. Yeah, I love the comments coming through the chat. So already you guys do look like Breaking Bad, though. You know, Jesse and I've never seen it, but obviously there was that boutique whiskey company bottling you did, and it was the Breaking Bad image kind of on it.
You're not going to
I thought was so funny.
You're not going to describe what I was clothed in, are you?
The state of dress? No.
Thank you. State of
iconic scene.
Yeah.
I love Andreas' question. When's the Heisenberg Blue Bottle Special Edition coming out?
Well, that's a great idea. It's something that we'll have to look at.
While we're drinking this, I'd like
I don't know.
While we're trying this, the one thing that I tried to develop with our whiskies is the aroma, the light floral notes, just on the nose. You've got to enjoy the aroma, the nose of a whiskey, as well as the flavour.
You probably, with your kits that you received, you've probably got some tasting notes as well, pocket guide in there. So some people love tasting notes, some people don't. But for us, you know, it can, I guess, drive some discussion. Beautiful work there, Emma.
I know, like an air hostess for a second.
The price is right.
The safety demonstration.
Safety demonstration. And for us, really, it's sort of, you know, I get that sort of fresh, sort of cut grass, the real cereal malt. Actually, again, we want you to taste the whiskey.
There's cinnamon there.
Yeah, honeycomb, nougat. These are sort of those classic fresh apple, fresh pear, these sort of things. So it'll be interesting to get your feedback on the others as we progress, because they get quite different in some of the palate and mouthfeel as we go on.
When you're actually tasting our whiskies, the one thing I hope you appreciate is the residual sugar, the sweetness, the honey characters. That's developed with our fermentation process. Obviously, all the sugar hasn't been converted into alcohol, where there is still residual sugars which are there, and that's what gives the sweet caramel notes on the palate. Oh, last thing, a lot of you are actually looking at our whiskies, and they're very, very light. Now, the reason for that is that we are not like most distilleries. We don't add caramel to our whiskies. What you've got in your glass is the whiskey that we've produced, because we found that by adding caramel, it covers the flavour, and we refuse to do that. So light whiskies are just the way they come out of the still, out of the distillery.
Yeah.
Never judge your whiskey by the
Andreas
colour.
has got some.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, absolutely. Although having an over carameled whiskey is quite an experience. There was a Japanese bottle years ago, and it was as dark as Coca-Cola. It was very bizarre.
Wow.
But I love Andreas's note of sweet vanilla custard. That hits it bang on for me, that custardiness. And I'd love to, like, because obviously you're going for that Speyside style. I'd love to see what people think of, like, what Scottish Speyside distilleries it reminds them of. For me, I've always found you guys remind me of Brookletty with the unpeated,
Yes.
that grassy, little bit of like jasmine white flower thing on the back note, that green apple. Super, super cool. But take us through a little bit more of, you know, what, apart from we can make whiskey here, like, how did you turn that idea into actual brick and mortar stills and distillery and whatnot?
That was extremely difficult. As most people will understand, what you've got in your glass, we mature for 6, 7, 8, 9 years. We're able to do that because of the ambient temperatures in Melbourne or down in the South Australia. The ambient temperatures are much, much higher than in Scotland, because at temperatures of 7 degrees and below, whiskies don't mature. Scotland has 2 climates, cold and bloody cold, so they need to mature their whiskies for 10, 12, 15, 20 years. We achieve the same level of maturation in half the time now because of our climatic conditions and the way that the temperatures fluctuate. So that's the good news. The bad news is if our clients want to set up a distillery tomorrow, they're going to go for 5 years without selling anything. So that was the hardest thing, actually designing the equipment, installing it, getting it running to the levels that I was happy with, and then sit back and wait for 4, 5, 6 years while the whiskies mature. I cheated a bit because we had a whiskey convention up in Canberra, and I took it up there after 3 years. But okay, we won't tell anyone about that. That was the most difficult thing. Now, what was your other question that you line of discussion?
Oh, well, just turning it to brick and mortar and.
Okay, yes. That's number one. Number two, this has to be funded. So you've got to be. We started very slowly because I didn't know that I was going to make a whiskey that people was going to enjoy, and B, we basically were unfunded for that period of time to start with. So that was the most difficult thing for us in our production. Yeah, we're well over that now. So.
Dad was teaching during the week and making whiskey on the weekend. So he'd have his bed out there and run his distillation runs and these sort of things. So it was, it was self-funded. The banks didn't know what the hell a whiskey distillery was or how to actually fund, which they didn't. He had to put everything on credit card and these sort of rates. So we're talking the late 90s here. So we've probably skipped over sort of a little bit of the origin story, but Dad started in 1999 as the first, at the time, single malt whiskey distillery on the mainland of Australia. Lark Sullivan's Cove and Hellier's had started a few years ago.
About 5 years before.
In Tassie. But of course, Dad was the first on the mainland. And this is back in the period before large-scale broadband internet and these sort of things. So you didn't have those sort of connectivity and a lot of the networks and these sort of things. So these were really pioneers who are learning from the skills and the trade from scratch and really having to sort of figure it out themselves. Also in a period where, we're looking at, there was no excise relief whatsoever. So they're having to pay full tariff rates on excise, which was horrific. So it was to commit to that sort of thing, absolutely, huge effort. You've got to be equally dedicated and equally a bit mad, I think, to be able at that period of time to really, and that's why there was hardly any distilling going on, because it was just too bloody hard to do.
Probably one other thing with that, basically was when I got going, I'm just trying to think of what I was going to say. I'm losing my brain. Basically, people thought I was mad, and they just, they said, you're a nut. This is never ever going to work. So it was a lot of difficulty. The other thing which was most difficult was there was no engineering companies in Australia that we could build the equipment that I wished to use, because there were no whiskey distilleries. So basically I had to design all my own equipment and have it built by engineering companies. And that's one exception, and that was the still. Now, I had two choices: have a still made by a company in Australia that was probably just starting off making stills, or go to a company over in the UK that had been making stills for generations. Guess where I went? Over to the UK. And a lot of the discussions I had with the owner of the company at that stage was, what do you want your whiskey to be like? Because every dimension in this still is going to affect the whiskey that comes out. So we had a lot of discussions on what I liked in whiskey and the sort of flavors and character and aromas and whatever that I wanted, so that he was then able to build a still that gave us that character of whiskey. So that was quite a major exercise. And in fact, he was so excited about us setting up in Australia that he came out from the UK to show me how to put the still together. It was amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, I love it. We've got quite a lot of questions in the chat. I might get everyone to pour the double wood so we can get cracking onto the second whiskey while I ask some questions. Just a quick little one from Luke. Did you at any point in those early days, dip into gin for cash flow? Now I've seen some gin bottles, and I think vodka bottles as well.
Yes.
That,
yes. The first thing I did was, okay, I need cash flow. How am I going to do it? Gin and vodka. So I got the vodka going, and the gin, I actually sat back, and with the gin, I wanted a gin that you could actually enjoy neat, and you didn't have to add anything to kill the bad flavors. So yes, we got gin and vodka going, but there was a problem that every time we got gin and vodka in the production line, we got further behind with our whiskey. So, and the demand for the whiskey was growing by the day. So I basically said, look, vodka's out the door. Every time we do it, we're getting further behind. In gin, there were so many gin distilleries developing in Australia. I thought, well, why am I competing with hundreds of other gin distilleries when I can't keep up with the whiskey? So now basically we focus on our whiskey. We do a little bit of gin occasionally because we enjoy it, but we are basically a single malt whiskey distillery.
More for topping up your personal gin in the cabinet kind of round.
Don't tell Andrew that.
Yeah. I think he might know.
He might
so another great question from Nick is, having not been a whiskey drinker prior, who did you rely on in the early days to help guide you? Was it some of those Tassie distillers? Was there any kind of people from Scotland you had influence and help from? Yes, actually, it was rather weird. But basically, I set up the distillery as an organic chemist. So basically, I had the technology to do it. But I spoke to the company that made my still, and they gave me a few contacts. I'm just trying to remember where it was. It was in the university in
Harriet Watt.
Harriet Watt. Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Harriet Watt University. Now, I was talking to a chap over there, and he was very, very helpful. He taught whiskey distilling over there. And I suddenly realised after I'd been talking to him for quite a while that he ran the Scotch Whisky Institute, which is funded by all the Scotch malt whisky producers. So here I was talking to the guy that ran that, getting information. After a number of years, I finally thought I need to go over and watch what they do in Scotland. So I went round to a few distilleries and actually went to Harriet Watt University and had a good time there. So that was about the only learning that I went through. Basically, it was just using my chemistry.
There was We might want to talk about some of the feedback that you got from Jim Murray in the early days, Dad.
Yeah,
That sort of drove some of your whiskey production.
Yes, it did in fact. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we were invited to go up to Canberra, where the Australian Malt Whisky Society was having their first ever get together. This is up in Canberra. So I was talking to the chap that was running that, and he said, "Oh, Jim Murray's going to be the guest speaker at the convention. Why don't you get in contact with him and just say that you're going to be up there and you're going to be releasing your whiskies," which I did. And Jim said, "Why don't you send me some of your whiskey and I can check it out before I come over?" And I did exactly that. Drew barrel samples out of the barrel, sent them over to him, and thought that would be it. Now, with all these things, when you've got a whiskey that's 2-3 years old, it's very, very light. So I thought to myself, okay, I must do what everyone else does and add some distiller's caramel. So I added some distiller's caramel to the sample bottles that we took up to Canberra. Standing there at my little stall, and Jim Murray came up, took a glass, took a mouthful and said, "This is complete and utter rubbish. What have you done to your whiskies? This is not the whiskey that I was drinking back home." And I said, "Jim, I had to put some caramel." He said, "Never, ever add caramel to your whiskey because it destroys the flavour." So that was the first thing that I learned. And from that moment, we've never, ever added distiller's caramel. The second thing, he looked at the bottle and he said, "David, you're bottling at 40%. Why 40%? I said, "Well, everyone else does." No, I didn't want to hear that. Every distillery will have its signature strength that will work for it with its equipment. You go away and do a batch at 40, 41, 42, all the way up to 50, try them and you'll discover what it was. And he was darn right. At 40%, you had to hunt the nose and hunt the flavour. It just wasn't there. But at 46, it erupted out of the glass and it was beautiful. So from that moment on, we've always bottled our 3 basic standards at 46%. So that was a major learning curve for me.
Yeah, amazing. Cool.
Hmm.
One question, this is from Ollie, so he gets last on the list of Ollie's questions. And then you can tell us, obviously, what the double wood is, what it's about. And I think it kind of ties in as well, because this has been one of your core range items for quite a while now. And it's a question I have too. How do you keep making your whiskey so damn consistent? Ollie is saying, it tastes the same as when he, tried it back in 2013. And I concur. I have been trying your whiskies for, since as long as I've been back when I was at Whiskey and Ale Mint, 4 years ago now. And there's no change. It is the same consistent flavors. How do you manage that?
It's a secret. I can't tell you. No, I can tell you. One of the things that I and all the people tonight will understand is many distilleries have good batches and bad batches. You'll get a batch and you say, "Oh, that's not bad," and you have another one, "Oh, I don't like that as much." And there's a lot of variation in the whiskey that's bottled. The one thing I was determined to stamp out was that, and to have a whiskey which was consistent in flavour, aroma. Now, the way I did that, being an old chemistry teacher, what we do in the distillery is we have a production manual, which I wrote. Now, the production manual is step by step by step what goes through the process. No decisions are made by any of our employees. They follow the instructions. Basically, if there's a problem, they talk to Andrew or they talk to me, say, "This doesn't match with what's in the production manual. What do I do?" And then we sort it out. So basically, we don't have distillers, we don't have brewers, we have people who are keen, enthusiastic and want to be part of a team. And we teach them how to go through the process and to produce our whiskies. That's how we get consistency. Now, you mentioned consistency. There is a slight variation here. Yes, our batches are consistent, but if you took half a dozen samples from different barrels of the same batch, you would notice there would be a slight difference depending on the barrel that it came from. Now, that's just barrel to barrel variation. If you had one sample now, another barrel in 10 minutes, and another one in another 10 minutes, you wouldn't notice it because they're quite similar. But in fact, we do get variation from barrel to barrel. Now, a lot of distilleries, the way they get around that is to mix barrels. We don't do that because when you mix 3 barrels, you get an average. We don't want our consumers to get an average. We want them to get the best. So one of Andrew's jobs is to come in on Monday morning, take samples out of the barrels, sit back and try them all, and then write notes how the barrels are developing. He doesn't do every barrel in the distillery, it'd be on his ear, but we have basically a log of when we think the barrels should be ready. So that's the thing we do. And if it's not ready, we just leave it. Come back in 6 months or 12 months and have a check it again. Some barrels might be super quick. They mature in 5 years. Other barrels might take 6 or 7 or 8 years. Who cares? The important thing is our consumers get the best that we can produce.
I better if anyone's still got double wood left in their glasses, I better explain a little bit about what the hell you're drinking. So the second one's the double wood, and the clues in the name here. 2 barrels involved, 2 different oaks. So this one actually starts its life as the classic, so as the first one that you had. So it's basically spent sort of the first 6 years or so in an American oak ex-bourbon barrel. And then we transitioned it across to a French oak barrel for about the last 10, 11, 12 months. Now that is a virgin French oak barrel because we're not looking for any influence from previous contents of that barrel to come through into the whiskey. What we're looking at here with the French oak is that French oak influence itself, the oak. So on the nose, the first whiskey is really sort of fresh apples, fresh pears, honeycomb, nougat. The second one now you're starting to get a bit more oak influence. We find that sort of short finishing in French oak tends to provide you're getting a bit more sort of stewed fruits rather than fresh fruits, sort of Christmas puddingy type notes, cinnamon, raisins, dark chocolate, these sort of elements. And that's purely that French oak, that last 12 months in the French oak. Big difference between American oak and French oak. American oak bourbon barrels have a heavy char layer. So the coopers will fire the inside of the barrels. They're looking to have a charring, a barrier between the spirit and the wood. So with American oak maturation, you're not getting much oak influence because of that char layer, that barrier. French oak barrels tend to have no charring or very limited charring. Therefore, there's no barrier. So you are getting that oak influence, that wood coming out. So if you're wanting to look for a bit more oak coming through in your whiskey, you're probably looking to get some sort of finishing in French oak. So that's the double wood. A bit of a Christmas special, we call this one. So it goes well with your plum pudding, and a really good sort of a low risk option. People coming in looking to buy for gifts, we tend to sort of push them to the double wood because it hits most people's palates just really, really pleasantly, and sort of hits a lot of nice notes.
Yeah, I think you can tell how that second exposure to the French oak really makes a difference. Everyone's loving it. Michael, the double wood is so good. Nick, it's not quite as sweet as a classic, but it's still bloody great. Always loving the double wood. Andreas coming with some great tasting notes. Coconut rough is a great one. I got the freeze-dried raspberries when they cover them in dark chocolate.
Oh,
I
wow.
got so much of that just on the nose, like that ascorbic acid fruitiness with the dark chocolate. It's
one of the
really
things
great.
One of the things that Andrew was leading to is that with this particular whiskey, the one thing we don't want is to have the French oak wood overpowering the whiskey. A lot of whiskies that have been matured in oak casks, the wood character overpowers the flavour. And that's why we only leave it in there for 10, 11 months, just depending on the activity of the French, because we just want that touch of wood character, which you can get on the nose with this whiskey. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Matthew's saying double wood equals young. And I have to call out Nick for saying, Andrew, you must hate Mondays. It's like the anti-Garfield, right? You know.
Well, you've got to have some reason to go to work on a Monday, right? You've got to get off.
Yeah.
Got to get off to the get the working week off to a flyer.
Whatever gets you out of bed in the morning.
There you go. Everybody puts their hand up to want that
Yeah.
job. No one puts that. None of my mates put their hand up to do the cleaning and sanitizing that we need to do most of the week.
And milling.
Yeah. Actually, this is this
I
double
imagine
wood.
the cleaning and sanitizing is twice as hard when you're drunk.
Yeah, you could say that. But we only taste just for professional purposes, of course, on Mondays. It's actually nights like tonight where we can actually sit back and actually really enjoy our whiskies, because most of the time we're just sort of trying them to sort of see if there's any faults or issues, or we're trying it out of casks, and it's pretty strong, and you're just sort of checking barrel samples. So it's nice to be able to sit back and enjoy. And so yeah, we make some pretty bloody good whiskey. I'm happy with that.
Yeah. The other thing too is that most of the character of the whiskey we can pick up from the nose, the aroma. We obviously taste it, but you can tell 95% of a whiskey's character just from the nose. Yeah.
Yeah. And you guys have a great connection. Some whiskeys, the nose and the palate can be really disconnected, but with all your whiskeys, I've always found that you guys have a really great, I call it like a flavor story. You know, the story starts at the nose and then through the palate and then on to the finish. And you have a great flavor story all the way through. It's consistent. It's not fantasy to sci-fi to crime drama, you know.
I like that, Emma. I'm going to use that. The flavor story.
You can have that one on me.
Oh well,
Yeah,
I'll credit you along the way. Nice sort of feedback from or question from Alan M there about time in the barrels and finding the right balance. 100%. Like we, as Dad mentioned, all of our whiskies are single barrel releases, which we find produces the best whiskey, but it is labor and time intensive. So what we effectively do is that we make the whiskey, we put it into a barrel, we forget about it for 5 years effectively. Each barrel has a birth certificate, which is telling us what's in it, when it was filled, all the relevant statistics. After about 5 years, we start trying that barrel quite regularly, sort of every sort of 3-4 months, and we'll write sort of notes, you know, about how it's progressing and those sort of things. So we will definitely sort of sit down and sort of work through where each one's at and how it's going. It might need another 6 months, it might need another 12 months, 2 years. So yeah, you can't just assume that once the barrel hits a certain age, it's going to be ready to go. It's all about the nose and the palate. And if we're putting it into a bottle, we need to make sure that we're happy with what's going into each and every bottle. Yeah, tough job, I know, but it makes sure that we know exactly what's going on out there.
Yeah. Jonathan, the 5-year minimum to be called whiskey, no. In Australia, it's what, 2 years, 1 day? In Scotland, it's 3 years.
Yeah. When I started distilling, I looked at the 2 years and I thought, well, I'd like to bring this, as it did all the other distillers in Australia, I'd like to bring this in line with what the rules and regs are in Scotland. So we worked timelessly to get the Australian government to increase that 2 years up to 3 years, but they wouldn't do it. So it doesn't matter. You know, we don't use that figure anyway. So
I think, Dad, did you actively fight a potential regulation change where they wanted to bring in Australia, you could call it whiskey after no age period of time?
Yes, what happened after I'd been distilling for a couple of years, a brandy distiller that shall remain nameless no, it was a rum distiller that shall remain nameless, wanted to produce a colourless rum. And to do that, they didn't want to put the rum into casks because it got the immediate colour. So the rum distillery went to the government and pleaded the case that all spirits, rum, whiskey and brandy in Australia should not have a minimum period in cask, because if that was the case, they didn't have to put their rum in casks and they could sell their white rum or produce it a lot more quickly. Well, we had a major battle with the federal government over that, because they were so convinced that they wanted to convert it to 0 years in barrel to be called whiskey rum in Australia. We finally convinced them if that was the case, all the distilleries in Australia would be out backwards. We'd just have to close down because the quality would. Well, the rest of the world
protecting the market
wouldn't put up with it. You know, no maturation period in Australia. Who'd buy our stuff? So that was another thing we had to deal with early in the piece.
Just to close off on, sorry, Emma, I was just to close off the discussion on sort of the ages of our whiskies and those sort of things. Most Australian whiskies you guys will try tend to be 2, 3, maybe 4 years old. So our whiskies are at least 6 years old, mostly up sort of 6, 7, 8 years old. So I guess what we're with sherry finishes and wine finishes and muscat and these sort of things, because of the flavour which is pouring out of the barrel from the previous contents, you can get a whiskey out in a short period of time, so 2, 3 years. But when we're just using American oak ex-bourbon barrels largely, with no previous contents, we need the extra years to make sure that whiskey is as good as it might possibly be before we barrel it. So our whiskies at 6, 7, 8 years are some of the oldest sort of core range whiskies that you'll find in Australia.
Yeah. And Nick was wondering what your oldest current barrel is in your bond store. I know you were talking about how you leave the cask for 5 years and forget about it. And I know that there was a release where you literally did forget about a cask for quite a while. But yeah, what's the oldest you got?
We've got one in there, which we're going to release as a bit of a celebratory release when we finally get our move to Kensington. Hopefully sooner rather than later. And I reckon that would be at this stage probably around 13 years old.
Could be a bit. I might just jump in there. Now, the reason the casks that Andrew is talking about has a little bit of a backstory. And the backstory was that when I started, was I going to buy a brewery? Was I going to put in a distillery? Or was I going to put all the tanks in and then suddenly discover that I can't make whiskey in Australia? Well, the simple solution is go and find a brewery in Victoria that can do all the brewing for me and just worry about the distillation. And that I did. I found Mountain Goat Brewery in Richmond. I provided the grain, I provided the yeast, I gave them the instructions for the brew, and I used to drive down there with my trailer and a 1,000-litre tank on the back each week, and they would fill up with the wash, the beer, and I'd bring it back and distill it. Well, this went on for 3, 4 years. Now, the problem was at that time that Mountain Goat Brewery got very, very popular, and they were finding it more and more difficult to provide services for us. Well, what do I have to do? Design and install a brewery myself, which we did. So what I did back in those days is the first 2 batches, the batches of peated and the batches of unpeated, we kept a 200-litre barrel of each. Now that's, I think, close to 15 years now, Andrew. So that, and we call it DBs first. We're going to come up with a new, well, we can call it Death or Glory, it's going to be. So that's sitting in the distillery now. So that's what, about 13, 14 years old, I suppose, something like that. So that's equivalent to 20, quite an old Scotch whiskey. 30-year-old.
Keep an eye out for that one.
So that's been bottled, and we're going to release that when we actually move into Kensington. There's a bit of an excitement. So there's bottles there. Yeah, the very first brew we ever the very first brew we ever did ourselves totally under our own control.
All right. Well, maybe we should crack into the smokier side of Bakery Hill, the peated malt. If everyone wants to pop that in their glasses. Matthew's got an excellent question. Which bourbon company do you get the barrels from? So like which distillery, or is it just a barrel broker?
No. We actually import them from Scotland.
No,
America.
Sorry.
I was about to say, that sounds like a very long
No. We actually import it from America. We get it from Jack Daniels. So basically, we order a 20-foot container of barrels, 230 litre barrels, the big ones. We bring it in. We take out the number that we want, and if there's any other distilleries in Australia, we on-sell through them. So ours come directly from the US, from Jack Daniels.
90% would be Jack Daniels. We've also got some Heaven Hill and some Woodford Reserve barrels as well. So there's a little bit of a mix.
Interesting ones, yeah.
Cool.
So this one now, guys, is our peated malt. So yep, definitely getting into the smoky world now. But it's only a sort of mild to mid peat level whiskey. So going back 20 years, the Australian market here is quite new in drinking single malt whiskies, and especially Australian single malt whiskies. So Dad, when he was producing his peated malt, deliberately decided to keep the peat levels down a little bit. So if you're familiar with your coastal Islay peated whiskies, your Lefroy, Ardbeg, Kalilas, you're looking at sort of 40 to 45 parts per million in the peat characteristic. We're only looking at about 20 to 25 parts per million in our peated malt. So that you're definitely getting the peat elements coming through, but hopefully you're also still getting the beautiful sweetness and the mouthfeel and the other flavors of the whiskey, not just being dominated by the peat. The other thing with our peated malt is it's actually a Highland style peat rather than a island style peat. So peat has different characteristics based on where it is. If it's an island peat, generally, or it's basically decomposing seaweed matter. If it's a Highland style peat, it's decomposing forestry matter. So your island peat is going to provide more of that sort of salty, medicinal, iodine notes that you get from that coastal peat, like a Lefroy. Whereas this Highland style peat, it doesn't really have that medicinal iodine notes, more of an earthy, more of a rounded, leathery sort of cigar style peated.
The Scotch whiskey, which is similar, would be Jura. That's a Highland peat.
Oban?
Sorry, Oban. Yeah. Geez, I'm losing.
Or even the Glendronach sort of peat as well.
I think you guys have a very Ardmore style peat.
Yep.
I think Ardmore, there's a butteriness, there's a little bit of vegetal kind of thing, and Ardmore sits on that Speyside Highland border, so it's kind of perfect for what flavor profile you're trying to achieve here. But yeah, I love the comments, Matthew. I typically don't like peated. This one's really nice. Tom's saying it's well balanced, great earthy peat with sweetness. Yeah, absolutely. And so you guys get the peated malt from Scotland? Which malt?
The answer is yes. Now, when I started initially, we imported malted barley from Scotland. Yeah. But what we found was that I wanted to have more control over the style of peat, the flavour process, and we discovered a maltings up in Orange. Sorry, no, that's the one we normally do. So basically, we've got a New Zealand maltings that produces this for us. They would use Scotch. They would use malt coming from Scotland, the actual peat. But this is actually produced in New Zealand.
Not this one. So every peated whiskey that we've bottled so far has been the Scottish peated malt, because it's only been about the last 2 years that we've been using a New Zealand Gladfield malt. We're hoping, there's no maltsters in Australia who are actually dealing with peat on a commercial capacity at the moment. So that's why sort of our peats and most of the Australian peats tend to be the peated malt coming from overseas. The other thing, there is peat in Australia, and if and when that does start getting used commercially through the maltings, the flavour profile could be quite different. There could be quite more eucalypt sort of coming through and different flavour notes. So how that comes through in a whiskey will be interesting to see. Could be something to experiment with down the track, but I think it would taste quite different to the peated malt that you've got in your glass at the moment.
Do you think that that's something that's going to happen? I've been looking a bit into peat and how environmentally protected it is, and how, you know, you're really not allowed to dig it up unless it's private property. Do you think that that's something that's going to maybe change, or do you think that we should just give up on the idea of ever being able to touch Australian peat?
You've probably got more of an understanding or been digging into it, researching it than us, Emma. We're just sort of making the stuff at the moment.
I'd be a bit worried about the eucalypt character that may be involved in Australian peat, because a lot of the material out here is eucalypt. So it
might be medicinal in a not so good way.
Could be.
Exactly.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, Andrew had a great question a little while ago. Is the Bayswater Distillery still open to visit? I imagine it's looking pretty bare bones at the moment.
Yeah, basically we've stopped doing our organised tours. We're still out there during the week. So my answer would be, if you can come out during the week while we're there, we'd be happy to walk you around.
Monday, Tuesday or Wednesday. Thursday, Fridays we tend to be out and about.
Yeah. Just get in touch with us. Don't just come out, because we wouldn't want you to be disappointed with us being out somewhere. But yeah, we've actually started packing things down. So I did hint on it before, but we are relocating the distillery to Kensington in the inner north part of Melbourne, just 3 k's from the CBD. And we're finally going to be able to set up a retail shop, a whiskey cellar door bar. So that's going to be really exciting. We just had a number of building delays, like all building projects seem to be delayed everywhere, I hear. So we were hoping that we would have been in there sort of a few months ago, but things are dragging on, and we're looking like it'll be sort of toward the end of the year that we get everything moved in. But next year, definitely keep an eye out for us, come and visit. But circling back to Bayswater, do drop us a line, and we'd be happy to meet you if we can do it. But the place is looking a bit grungy. But maybe that's good. You can see the old place before the new place.
Fair enough. I second Michael's. Can't wait to see the new dig, the new distillery. And just a quick tasting note from Andres before we move on to the next one. The cigar leaf call is a great call. That like earthy but like proper tobacco leaf, cigar leaf kind of thing. This is definitely, oh look, I don't smoke cigars at all, and I just like the smell of them. But this peat with like a small little cigar would be really
it's
cool.
just a suggestion of cigar leaf.
Yes.
just a whiff of a cigar in the same room, not even lit, just you know, untouched. But yeah, so let's move on to our 4th dram. Now this is obviously quite special for us, and probably one of the last kind of fun bottlings to come out of the Bayswater Distillery.
It could well be the last, I would say.
Ooh.
So
well, yeah, I was lucky enough to try the barrel when I was there a couple of months ago now. Time flies. But yeah, so the whiskey list Cask, you tell us about it.
Yeah. Well, I should point it up there. It's a little bit of a sort of a special sort of a.
I'm obsessed with the label.
Yeah, you might have to check that out on the Whiskey List website to get a good look at that one. But what we've done, okay, so we've known and enjoyed doing a bunch of things with the Whiskey List over the last few years, and Chris and Ollie and Emma was talking about, let's, think about doing a special exclusive release. We thought, gee, we don't do this very often, or, for many people at all. But we know and we trust you guys. So why not? Let's give it a crack. So we then were chatting, and as per the usual conversation, it goes, what kind of something different? What have you got that's interesting, which is a bit different to what you usually do? So I'm like, geez, everybody wants something different. Let's have a bit of a think. Let's have a bit of a look. What have we got going on? So sometimes the best ideas are the ones that are lying in plain sight, and we were looking at the double wood, which you guys have had, second whiskey, and that is a unpeated double wood. Starts in American oak, finishes in French oak. And we thought, well, why don't we do that with a peated whiskey? We've never released anything like that before. So our peated whiskey's always just been 100% American oak ex-bourbon barrel. So that's what we did. We found some peated whiskey, which had been in an American oak barrel for 5 years, something like that, and transferred it to a French oak barrel, and gave it the double wood treatment. So that's been in the French oak barrel for 6 months or so. So it's quite a short sort of finish in the French oak, but it actually came through sort of quickly. It was the influence. If you're nosing it and you're tasting it now, it's you're definitely getting that sort of sweetness and oakiness and richness that the French oak is providing, and it's just sort of sitting with and working with that peat. We found that it was just intertwined with that peat really nicely, and we were like, wow, we should have done this years ago. What a great idea. Yeah. So as it turned out, it was a bit of a semi-obvious choice, which really came through nicely. And we've sort of delivered this one at 58%. So a nice little punchy number, which, interested with your feedback.
Yeah, we would love to get your feedback as well. Actually, for tonight only, we are actually doing a fun special on the bottles that we have left of this whiskey. So really, really exciting. I've just popped it in the chat. So the link is up above because I'm bad at technology and somehow can't figure out how to put a link in a text box. But yeah, so you get some fun discounts, and we've got a great discount on this one. But I was so excited when I heard that we were partnering with you guys to bottle this whiskey. Like I love the simplicity, but still the innovation in what you guys do when we're talking about this bottle. And yeah, we obviously love your stuff, and I was very excited to try at the distillery as well, just before, a couple months before bottling. And yeah, I think everyone's comments are great. Andres, great nose. Nick, that takes the edge off the ABV really beautifully. Tom's really into it. Very nice. Matthew, it's creamier than the peated, the similar finish. I agree. It kind of takes an Isla turn with that French oak, dries it out. It gives me very like Ardbeg 10, but make it local. A lot of those lovely vibes. It like the mouthfeel is peatier than the ppm would indicate as well, which I think is so cool.
It's probably what we find. I think it's probably 5.5, 6 years old. So we find that our peat tends to dissipate a bit over the years. So some of our peated malts, which are sort of 8 years old, the peat tends to have just sort of hinted at disappearing a little bit, whereas this one's quite fresh, I think, still. So you're still getting quite a youthful peat coming through, as opposed to maybe a bit more of an older sort of statesman style peat from the other ones.
Yeah. And how old was this cask? I can't quite.
Yeah,
Approximately.
the finishing cask or the original American oak cask?
Go with the original American oak cask.
Yeah, well, I think I couldn't tell you. Look, it would have been, I think it was in the American oak for 5 years, perhaps 5.5. That would have been probably a third fill American oak. Most of our sort of large scale American oak barrels are sort of on their third fills now. And then the finishing in the French oak, I think the French oak could potentially have been second, third fill also. So most of our barrels we've had for 20 years. So when you're talking about 7-8 year maturation each time and third fills, 20 years goes pretty quickly. So a lot of people sort of ask, what do you do when the barrels are emptied? Well, we fill them up with new make again. Each barrel, each maturation tends to take a little bit longer. So if the first fill on that barrel might have been ready in 6 years, second time might have been ready in 7, third time might have been ready in 8. It does get to the same point. It just takes a bit longer each time. Eventually, it'll get to a point where it's just too slow. We can get it off to a cooper. They can shave it back to bare wood on the inside, refire it. We've basically got a brand new barrel again. So we can continue to use those barrels for many, many years.
Yeah, fantastic. It's good to see that you guys are doing that. I think that's something we, as the whiskey industry in Australia gets older, I think it's something we need to normalize and be like, yeah, like it's not one and done. It's, again and again, like in Scotland until it's an exhausted old lady cask that can barely give anything out. Like quite a few of the barrels, I imagine they have it like Gordon MacPhail or something. Love Michael's comment, absolutely love it. Feel the peat. It's a bit subdued with the double wood maturation compared to the cask peated. Fair enough. I think it's integrated in a different way, and I love that. Like all it took was one cask to change that. Alan, it's a great balance of flavors. Nick is asking, have you guys considered private casks?
Yeah, well, no. We've been requested quite a number of times. The problem we've got with private casks is we can't keep up with the demand for our whiskies now. If we were producing private casks, our production regime would be going backwards. So at this stage of our production, we can't do private casks. Look, once we move into the new location, we'll be increasing production there, probably by a factor of 3. So it may be a situation once we move to Kensington, we can do that. But up to now, we can't keep up with demand for ourselves. Because of that, we don't advertise, we don't market, because all that would do was increase the demand for the whiskies, which we can't handle at the moment. So basically, our whiskies are known by word of mouth, people that try them and talk to their friends and things like that.
Yeah, yep, fair enough. Yeah, I think that's it's always great. It's that you want to be able to do it for people, but also at the same time it's like, well, we don't want to deprive literally everyone else who's clamoring for our whiskey at the same time. So, fair enough. Great tasting note of the blackberry jam from Andreas on this. It's that tartiness, that like high tart acid note. Super, super good. So speaking of special casks though, our last whiskey is very exciting. I don't know if anyone else's little sample had a couple of floaty boys and such in it, which I always get excited about when I see it in a little bottle. I'm like, oils, give me the oils. When you get barrel bits in a sample, that's when you know, like the bits of char you haven't bothered to filter out. It's my favorite. But yeah, tell us all about this. I
might kick off with this one, and then I'll throw it to Andrew for the actual tasting. Rather than what's in your glass at the moment, we go back a number of years, and I was doing a tasting at the Healesville Hotel, and I was there, and it was getting fairly late at night, and I decided rather than going home, I'd have dinner at the Healesville Hotel, and which I ordered, and I spoke to the bar staff and said, what's a nice red wine to go with this? And they said, well, we've got a Pinot Noir from a winery just down the road in the Yarra Valley that we don't normally get because they're a very small family winery. And I tried it, and it was fantastic. It was probably one of the best Pinots I've ever had. And I went back and I asked the bar staff, well, what is it? Well, it comes from a winery in the Yarra Valley called Pimpernel. Now, Pimpernel is a very, very small winery, about halfway to Hillsville. So being a mad wine enthusiast, I thought I'd go and talk to these guys. So I went down there, and it didn't take long before we discovered that they make wine, I make whiskey, and wow, here we go. It wasn't long after that I got a phone call from the winemaker, and he said, look, we've got a Muscat barrel here that we've just finished with. Would you be interested in perhaps using it in the distillery? And I said, you're not wrong. So we went back, picked it up and sat back, and then made a bit of a plan for it. So that's the background to this. It's actually a Muscat barrel from Pimpernel Winery. And over to you, Andrew, for the tasting.
Yeah, so every wine they make is amazing. So if you do see some Pimpernel out there, jump on it. It's sensational. So the Muscat barrel arrived, and we got a sample of the Muscat with it. And what we thought, okay, we've got a barrel. What are we going to fill it with? So we thought, let's try the Muscat, and let's try a couple of drops of, Paul Field, nailed it. There you go. What's that? Pinot number 2, is it? Or
Hang on,
he's right. He's writing. We'll come back to that. We dropped a few. The Shiraz, very nice. We dropped a couple of drops of the Muscat into our whiskies, as in our classic and our peated, to find out what we think may work well down the track. Now, the classic, which also contributes to the double wood, it was just a bit too much sweetness going on, because if you had Muscat before, it's a sweet dessert wine. But when we added the Muscat to our peated malt, it was like, wow, that sweetness of the Muscat, the savory smokiness of the peated malt really cut through, and it really became this beautiful sort of savory sweet whiskey. So we filled the Muscat barrel with about it was probably 5-year-old peated malt. So the whiskey that you guys had at number 3. And it's been in that barrel for about 12 months or so. So that's what you guys are drinking. It's our Muscat finish. It's 55%, I think we brought it to for this particular tasting, because it's not bottled or anything. It's in a barrel, so it's a barrel sample. Yep, Emma, the floaties, they're little parts of the Muscat from the Muscat barrel. So little sort of little bits of sort of fruit and or what have you. And it just came out really. It's like a dessert whiskey. So it's probably a good one to finish on.
Definitely dessert by a campfire.
Quite treacly, and it's going to be something that we'll figure out what we're going to do with it. In the next little while.
I would love to get people's opinions on this one specifically before I launch the poll, and we all fight over what our favorite was from the tasting. I'd love to see what people's opinions on this are, because I think this could go another nearly 2 years to really suck all that Muscat sweetness out of it without overbearing the peat. But I'd love to see what other people think of how it's tracking, because obviously a year in, and campfire smoked jelly beans, such a good call, Dan, so good. And great question, Michael. How old was the Muscat barrel? Was it
question? I couldn't tell you.
I don't. All I know is when I picked the barrel up, we filled it almost immediately. I don't know how long the Muscat had been in the barrel before that.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I'm going to launch the poll, find out what everyone's favorite is. Andrew, David, I know you guys can see it. We're going to try and keep it secret until people.
A good while you're doing that, Emma, a good opportunity for people to go back and retry the very first whiskey as well, the classic. And if you've got some still left in that glass, that one in particular really ripens up and becomes really ultra rich and sweet over time in the glass.
And on the nose, it's just riches out.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nick's too late. Smashed that one already.
Nick, have you had all 50 mil of that one already?
Couldn't say what he was doing.
Or 20 mil of that already?
Look, you know, it's good.
Well, it's a good opportunity to re-emphasize that there is a special that they're running on the Whiskey List website, and you, if you do purchase, you can get any of these whiskies through them, and I think there was a 10% discount applied if you picked up a bottle of the peated double wood. So don't forget to check that out if you're just really desperate to get some more classic malt or anything else.
Yeah, I'll share the link again for everyone. But yeah, we've got an absolutely amazing opportunity to stock up all the Bakery Hill you're going to need until you can visit them at the Kensington Distillery. But yeah, if you buy the Whiskey List exclusive bottling, we held a couple bottles back for tonight's tasting for sale, and there's a discount on that. And if you buy that and a couple of other bottles, you get a sweet little discount on a couple of other bottles as well. But yeah, some great tasting notes. Seriously, the Muscat Cask could be a cologne. You should start standing in Meijer stores and be like, you want to.
It's not a bad idea.
Fantastic direction on the Muscat Cask. Love that one. Can't stop nosing this. Gets that like old school rock candy. I agree, Paul and Andreas, that rock candy vibe is definitely coming in. Old school rock candy. Can you even get that anymore? But yeah. All right. I think it's been a pretty even battle between all the different expressions, but I think I mean, look, am I chuffed that the Whiskey List bottling came out on top? Yes. Were they all amazing, and was it a close race? Also, absolutely yes. You clearly got a lot of fans with the Muscat Cask work in process. Matthew, with the purchase deal, it should be applied at checkout. If you have any issues, send us a little email and we'll get it done for you. But it will auto apply at checkout.
Michael Seagrave has asked the question about a release date on the Muscat finish. Michael, you can just pop out to Bayswater next week and we'll sort you out.
You want one now? We'll get you one.
Well, it'll be in your little take-home flagon and you'll be sorted. We'll probably, it's going to be a next, well, not sure yet. We've got a few things lined up, so it was actually just a good opportunity for us to sort of sling that past this wise audience to sort of get some feedback, and could be next year if we think it's 100% ready to go, or we might do some and then leave some, and we've got a few options.
Yeah, amazing. Well, it was a great little insight into what you guys have coming up. I can imagine it's going to be a very precarious move for all these precious barrels sloshing around with whiskey.
That's
to get into the new venue.
That's the part of the move that freaks us out the most, Emma, is seeing a truck drive down the freeway with our full barrels of whiskey on it. You might need to arrange to block to get a police escort or something like that.
Police escort, pop a Valium beforehand. Yeah, avoid Montague Street Bridge.
Oh, Andrew, yeah, good call.
I think we would all cry. I'd truly cry if that happened. But yeah, Michael will help escort it. Yeah, and then it'll end up being like one of those Ocean's 11 heist
Oh
movie.
yeah, gosh, I could just see that.
But yeah, thank you so much, guys, for this opportunity to take us through your incredible range of drams. And I'm so excited to see what you guys do with your new space. I'm so excited to see the new space, and to, you know, be able to drive a little bit of a shorter distance to come visit.
Yeah. Oh, we can't wait as well, that's for sure.
Yeah, fantastic. And yes, if you live in Melbourne, I'm sure, I know that I've been on a tour. I'm sure once the Kensington Distillery is up and running, it will be friend central. It will, you know, there'll be so many whiskey lovers galore to visit and see there. But yeah, thank you everyone again. Yeah.
I might, if I can, Emma, I might just put a bit of a call out. We've got if anyone is on Facebook there, we've got and if you do love our whiskies, we've got a little group called the Bakery Hill Whiskey Enthusiasts. It's free for anybody to join.
Now you said a little group, there's 600 people on it.
Yep, that's still a little group. It's you know, it's like they're like our extended family members.
Yes.
So feel free if anyone would like to join our enthusiast group. People just tend to take photos of themselves drinking whiskey in different parts of the world or talking about different releases, and we do some little added benefits for that little group. We sort of generally give them a couple of days advance notice on new releases and things like that, and we might do a little Christmas get together. So feel free if anyone would like to come on board and join the group.
It'd be great.
I can second the Christmas event. That was so much fun.
And
yeah,
thanks so much for everyone for joining us. These are a lot of fun for us, and yeah, I hope you guys had a lot of fun, and we'd love to catch you again soon.
These are the fun. These are the fun times for us. It's certainly better than hosing down tanks and whatever. So it's great to catch up with everyone. It's great to actually get to know people. So, and that's the important part of our business, is the side, meeting people, meeting our customers. So thank you very much for coming on board.
Yeah, thank you, David and Andrew. If you want to kick around for a little bit afterwards, for a debrief with Polly and I. But yeah, everyone else, have a wonderful night.
Yeah.
Take care.
Cheers.
See you at the next one.
Yeah.